Today is Friday, May 15th. I'm Cindy Allen, CEO of TradeForce Multiplier, a global trade consultancy services that handles everything from strategic trade to the more mundane classification projects that everyone in global trade does today. Welcome to Simply Trade, Cindy's version, where I take a Taylor Swift song and base an international trade update on it. I'm bringing this to you in association with the Global Training Center today. And today's song is, Are We Out of the Woods? Are we out of the woods yet? But first, what's happened in global trade this week? Well, the big thing is Section 122 tariffs in court have been challenged by the administration, as we thought it would be. They are continuing to challenge the fact that the president does have the authority to issue these tariffs. As well, CBP weighed in on these challenges, saying that it was virtually impossible for them to manage a tariff assessment on an importer by importer basis, and it would quickly become unwieldy and they would be unable to do that. So as a result, not only has the administration challenged this, they have also put a stay. The court has put a stay on the on CBP not collecting tariffs from the handful of plaintiffs that are involved specifically in this court case. So more to come on that as this goes through the process. Most people do agree that it will end up at the Supreme Court and be heard there. So no quick avenue for a resolution on this issue. The Supreme Court, in new news on a transportation aspect, in a case before the Supreme Court called Montgomery versus Carib Transport 2, there was a unanimous ruling, which is kind of rare in the Supreme Court, that logistics companies such as freight brokers may be held liable for violating safety regulations for the underlying carriers that they actually do business with and that they hire on behalf of their clients. This has prompted several trade associations, including the Air Forwarders Association, to caution their members to enhance vetting procedures for all carriers that they use and to ensure that they have safety protocols in place that demand that their underlying carriers meet. Now, this is going to be difficult for freight forwarders in the industry, especially if you are doing business with large air carriers or large vessel operators. Many freight forwarders do not have access to safety procedures, safety recalls, safety, any kind of safety issues for these massive international carriers. Can you imagine a small forwarder calling Delta and asking them for their safety procedures before they book freight on their international bound carriers? It's airlines. It's going to be almost impossible to do that, and as a result, the Air Forwarders Association, as well as others, are cautioning the forwarders, but also working with the large carriers to determine what's feasible here to ensure that the air forwarders and ocean forwarders are protected and not held liable in courts where they have no jurisdiction or no awareness of safety issues. In world news, the Middle East conflict, the war on Iran that was started by President Trump, resulting in the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, has resulted now in definitely higher prices, not just for gas, but for oil and fertilizer and also goods transiting. Also, we're seeing an impact on ocean freight rates and somewhat on air carrier rates that have increased due mainly to the gas prices, but also to capacity issues. In a report from a major freight forwarder, a global freight forwarder, they said that demand for ocean freight is up as companies do veer from air freight, which is more costly, to ocean freight, which is more economical. That increase is being seen from Asia, but not to North America, more to the rest of the world. North American volumes seem to be stabilized, if not dropped somewhat, due to many of the tariff challenges that we have. Um, Also, in news of negotiations, during the ongoing negotiations for USMCA that are ongoing with the USTR and their Mexican counterparts, as well as the Canadian counterparts, Congress has weighed in. Over 80 House members called for restrictions on the importation of Mexican produce. This is a major export for Mexico, and there is some concern that the Mexican market has taken over the US market. And the congressional members are asking for safeguards for US producers and specifically specialty crop growers. They want to make sure that they are shielded from unfair competitive advantages that Mexican growers enjoy. And they specifically cited lower wage costs and further regulatory burdens that the U.S. growers have, specifically in meeting EPA requirements, as well as labor laws that Mexican growers do not have. And as you remember, anti-dumping duty was suspended on tomatoes for the longest time, and that was recently lifted. The anti-dumping duty was 17%. That was suspended before. And as a result of that going into effect again, tomato prices have increased overall 15% since that anti-dumping duty case was reactivated. So there is some concern that pricing and inflation is going to be increased due to these measures. But we'll see how this affects the USMCA negotiations ongoing. This is just one of the issues that the negotiators are focused on in those negotiations moving forward. Others include automotive tariffs, content requirements, country of origin requirements. Those are all active conversations right now. And just when all of the news seems bleak right now, two things specifically have prompted me to ask, are we out of the woods yet? The first is CAPE. The CAPE declarations seem to be going really well, and good news, money is flowing to the importers. The IEEPA duties are being returned. Many importers were really reluctant to believe that they were going to be getting the money back, and we are seeing importers from all walks of industry and small and large that are reporting that they are receiving their refunds. They have hit the bank accounts. So that's really good news. And I have to commend CBP and the teams that facilitated this process, both on the automation and the policy side, that this seems to be working really well. There have been some hiccups, some ACE account issues. The ACE help desk is still very backed up. People are reporting that they are waiting 2 to 3 hours on the phone to get in-person assistance from ACE. So we're hoping that CBP does surge some additional resources to the ACE help desk and get those last few issues resolved for the importers. We're also waiting on phase 2 of CAPE. They did indicate phase 1, they were not going to think about what is in phase 2 and how to achieve that until the hypercare period for phase 1 was over. And in my experience, hypercare is anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. So we're coming up on that deadline. So we hope that we will be getting some more details on what is included in phase 2, including specifically recon. There's a lot of money tied up in recon. And as of last week, the recon filers, and reconciliation, for those of you who don't know, is where you don't know a price or a classification of something when it comes in, and you file an estimated price, let's say. Many articles, Mexican produce, for example, comes in, it goes to market, the sale price is affixed after importation. And so at the time of importation, those importers give an estimated value. And then they come back and file what's called a reconciliation entry and say, these are the actual values, or this is the actual classification of the good that is coming into the United States. As of last week, the reconciliation filers indicated that they still had to pay IEEPA duties on those goods that came in before IEEPA was considered to be found illegal. So there were some issues. There are still some issues with IEEPA being collected, and many of the importers have started lobbying to have that revoked or removed so that those importers don't have to pay what's deemed to be illegal. We do hope that phase 2 includes reconciliation, both that initial estimated filing as well as the finalized filing, and that it will move forward and that will alleviate some of the issues. But overall, great success. The second thing that really has brought to mind, are we out of the woods yet, is the Trump and Associated Business Group that went to China this week. They're on their way back now. Their visit, I think, although did not produce a lot of concrete details, did produce some hope for us that things are returning to normal, whatever normal looks like. The visit signaled that there's possible return to stability and predictability, which is really important right now for all of us in trade to know what duties are going to be paid, what duties are going to be due, and how to plan in the future. There were some agreements that were struck regarding that China was going to help weigh in on the Strait of Hormuz. China does oppose the militarization of the strait and also opposes the fees that Iran has imposed on the Strait of Hormuz passage. So there is some forward progress there. They also, the most interesting thing, I think, is that Secretary Bessent, Secretary of the Treasury, indicated that they want to establish a board of trade. And a board of trade would be comprised of government officials as well as private sector individuals from both China and the U.S. And they want to explore actually alleviating around $30 billion in tariffs that were associated on China. And these are going to be for goods that the U.S. is not really interested in producing in the United States, or that they are not interested in reshoring overall as an industry. We don't know what those look like, but they did say lower manufactured goods that were coming in, low cost goods that were coming in from China. And just for comparison purposes, there's about $120 billion in tariffs on Section 301 on Chinese goods. So this is a fraction of that. But I think what the story here is this a return to normalized trade? Are we actually headed back to negotiated trade, to understanding, having talks, allowing the private sector to have an input into those trade assessments, and away from sudden reactionary actions by the government? China has also agreed to buy $30 billion, mostly in oil and fertilizer products, as a result of this Board of Trade discussion, and to ensure that they're switching their reliance from Middle Eastern oil to U.S. oil. No word on how this is going to impact pricing in the United States due to demand and the free flow of oil. But I think the good news is I think we may be headed out of the woods. We can only hope. We'll talk to you next week.